Hello everyone, this is recording number 9 for Early Stoic Philosophy, a class on Stoic logic, physics and ethics. Today I want to talk about an especially contested dimension of Stoic philosophy, namely their conception of what they call indifferent things, or for short indifference, in Greek adiaphora. The Stoics say that things like wealth and health are indifferent. And if they didn't use indifferent in a technical sense here, that would probably be not only counterintuitive, but maybe also off-putting. It would seem quite evident that things like wealth and health supply us with considerations for deliberation. And, to think about that, we need not consider perfect health, and we need not think about luxuries. We can think about quite basic things. Let's say access to clean drinking water or nutritious food. And if we think about such basic things, it should seem really clear that things like health and wealth provide us with important considerations for deliberation. Now, the Stoics actually agree with that. And that is not always clear in introductory literature on Stoic ethics. Rather, sometimes it can just seem perplexing. Why are they calling things like wealth and health indifference? And doesn't that somehow mean that they actually think that those things don't matter? So it is really tricky to get clear about this combination of positions that on the one hand, the Stoics say that those kinds of things are indifferent, adiaphora, and at the same time, they do not say that those things kind of just don't matter. Now, the Stoics express that by saying that those things have value, and the virtuous person or the wise person takes those kinds of things into consideration when she makes her excellent decisions. The Stoics even call those kinds of things the material of deliberation, thereby making clear that those are precisely the things that a wise or virtuous deliberator is concerned with. Now, why then do they call these kinds of things indifferent? Here's one way in which they explicate this. They argue that there is really only one thing, and that is virtue, or also called wisdom, without which it is not possible to lead a good or happy life. And all these other things, they are the material of deliberation. They are the sorts of things that virtuous or wise decision-making is concerned with. But if you were to lose one of them or some of them, then being a good decision maker, being a virtuous person, being a wise person will kind of save you, because that's then the one thing that still makes it possible for you to lead a good life. And hence the Stoics think that there is a quite principled distinction between, on the one hand, those sorts of things that as deliberators, good deliberators, we are concerned with. Things like wealth and health, and a longer list would also include strength or having a good reputation or having one's perceptual faculties intact. And it would also include the opposites, such as illness or poverty. So those are the kinds of things that good deliberation is concerned with. But those things, even though they are, in another technical term, reasonably preferred, or reason prefers them or disprefers them, nevertheless, they are not good or bad, because only virtue is good and only the opposite of virtue, vice, is bad. Because without virtue, without being a good decision maker, one cannot lead a good life. One cannot be happy. That is the proposal. And so this proposal involves a lot of, critics say, artificial terminology. It involves a distinction between what is good on the one hand versus what merely has value, in Greek axia, on the other hand. And you might think, well, what is the difference between goodness and value? Aren't those just two terms for the same thing? Now, I want to explore this a little bit further by reference to a passage in the Platonic dialogue Euthydemus. And that passage is often studied with respect to Stoic ethics. And scholars often think, well, the Stoics somehow consider Socrates their ancestor, and they maybe invoke this passage in the Euthydemus. So in this passage, Socrates says that things like health and wealth benefit if they are used wisely, and they harm if they are used foolishly. But by themselves, Socrates says, they have no value. Now, a good reason to look at this passage and to think through the connection or differences to Stoic ethics is that here Plato uses this term axia, value, that becomes then so important to the Stoics. But sometimes when you read introductory literature, it is presented as if the Stoics simply were Socratics about these matters and simply kind of endorsed the position that Plato here ascribes to Socrates. That is decidedly not the case. Now, clearly there are resonances, and they might be kind of summed up by saying that both in what Socrates is saying and what the Stoics are saying, virtue or wisdom are the only thing that plays this special role of being inherently and independently good. That is an important common denominator. Nevertheless, there are also two important differences. Socrates says that if used wisely, something like health or wealth benefits, and if used foolishly, it harms, whereas the Stoics ascribe benefit and harm really only to virtue and vice. Now, why is that? There is the intuition that the good just is that which is good for us, and thus, for the Stoics, the two notions, goodness and benefit, are almost equivalent. And thus, for them, if we say that goodness is this very special category, different from everything that has value, then benefit also must be on that side of things. And hence, it won't be the case that things of value benefit or things of disvalue harm. Now, the other important difference is that Socrates says that by themselves, things like wealth and health have no value. But the Stoics say those things, even though they don't have goodness, they have value. And I want to end this recording by just asking the question, which of these two positions is more intuitive? I think that, or more compelling also. I think that is a question that we can ask just as ethicists. It's an important and interesting question, independent of engagement with ancient philosophy. Whether we think that something like money or health just has independent value, or whether its value depends on how it is being used. So an example would be, if someone uses their health to commit a crime, are we going to say, as Socrates does, that this kind of case shows that inherently something like health doesn't have value because it can be used for things like committing a crime? Whereas the Stoics say, well, this kind of example shows that something like health is not good, but it still has value, and it's implausible, they would argue, to deny that something like health has value only because it can be used badly. Another example would be if someone uses money foolishly. The Socratic position would say that this kind of case shows that inherently money doesn't have value because it can be used foolishly. But the Stoics would say, well, it shows this kind of case shows that inherently money is not good. But it would go too far, they would argue, to say that money doesn't have value. Now, I want to leave you with this question. If there is some plausibility to the Stoic way of thinking about this, then there might be reason to draw this somewhat artificial distinction between goodness and value.